Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Masterminds Connect. How's Dad? Early Father's Day gift to all the dads out there trying to figure out how's Dad's doing. We're gonna have a lively conversation. We got some wonderful men that's going to be on this call today. But first, we want to kind of help you all understand why we're here today. The prevailing narrative is that dads, black dads in particular, are absent from the crucial aspects of the development of their children, and more often than not, are only seen with regards to being the financial arm of their children and little to nothing else. But we all know that's not the full and accurate story. We know that dope dads exist. But because of the aforementioned prevailing narratives, the efforts of the father gets ignored. The man who is the father gets ignored. This program is intended to separate the man from any other role he may play and focus solely on the man as father. As men, we play a number of roles in the lives of our children, of our wives, of our spouses. But the role of father is a very important and paramount role, and it's important that we highlight the man as father. Today, I am joined by Eric D. Boyce Jr., Courtney, and Talib Jasser, who are going to join me in this conversation about dads. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
What up, everyone?
Glad to see all of you. So, I want to start off by reading some statistics and then you telling me how you feel about that. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So we all know that some of the narrative is that dads don't do much, and that particularly black dads are not in the picture. The viewpoint about Black fatherhood is a well-established structure of thought with a host of supporting beliefs that reinforce it like rebar in a concrete slab. Society is devastated because the majority of African American fathers are not at home nor involved in the lives of their children. The solution, therefore, is for black men to return to their responsibilities. These statements are stereotypes, fabrications, and completely wrong. The impact of these thoughts is girded in the foundation of American society, from systems of education to access to employment to incarceration. Today, I want to know first, how's dad? Each of you represent a different type of father, so I want you to take some time to introduce yourselves and tell us where, how are you feeling in being a dad?
Anyone? I guess I'll jump in. My name is Eric D. Boyce Jr., and I'm new to fatherhood. My daughter's 17 months, and me being a dad is, I feel like empowering and inspiring because I, for the first time, I got to feel what God's love felt like. So, to answer your question, how's dad? I'm learning something new every day as a new father.
And okay, yeah, Courtney can go.
All right, peace and love, folks. About 4 years into this fatherhood extravaganza. So, of course, first and foremost, I would echo what Eric has shared in terms of that first real experience feeling God's love, I would say. About 4 years into it, you start to realize the reality of the humanness in your child, right? And so there's that divineness, the divine light that you see in the more eros love for your kid. But then you realize they're a human just like you, and they're developing, and their foundations are starting to take form. And that brings you into a totally different space where you have to start to just be more cognizant of the fact that your child is a mirror of you. And a lot of times your child is a resurgence of all the stuff that you didn't deal with come in like human form. And so it smacks you right in the face some days where you're like, yeah, that's my fault. And whatever they're doing that they are not aware of is your fault. And so as dad, I'd say that's how I'm doing right now. I'm in a very observing space because I'm starting to see my son reflect some things that I just got to get into and take not necessarily responsibility but accountability for.
Hello.
All right. Well, welcome to parenthood, fellas. My daughter's 21 years old, and I also have a 24-year-old stepson. And then, how the father figure becomes with being an uncle. I'm also in the Big Brother, Little Brother program, and so I have a younger brother in that, and that also brings its own aspect of responsibility and need for show up. And so it's definitely a journey, and I'm happy that you guys are on it because it is one of the best. I mean, for me, I speak for myself, fatherhood, parenthood is a get to, it's something that's absolutely amazing, and it's the exploration of self as well as the discovery of this individual that we are simply life givers for, and that they are our hearts, as you've heard, out here walking with legs and arms and a head. That having a 21-year-old and a 24-year-old in my life, the separation has occurred. I am now uh, loving from a distance and parenting from a distance. And it's also an evolution. We evolve with them as well. What I'm dealing with my 21-year-old, you guys aren't even considering yet, and please don't consider it. Focus on 17 months and focus on 4 years old, because 21 is coming. So how's dad? Dad is concerned. My son is 24, and he lives in Wilmington, North Carolina, and there's concern for his Black body out in this world. My daughter, who's 21, and in Washington D.C., she's a senior at Howard. There's concern for her. There's a lot of concern, but there's also this opportunity for us as parents to know that, for me, I've raised them, and I trust them because I raised them. And if you don't trust your kids and you raise them, then that's got more to say about you than them. But they've been raised, and I trust them in that respect. And so even though I have my concerns because they're my heart in the world, I trust them at the same time, and that supports.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So the next question I want to ask you all is, what was it like the first time you found out you was becoming a father, and then that instant where the child was born? What was your first thoughts and feelings on fatherhood?
For me, my wife and I probably were married, I would say maybe 4 years before actually conceiving a child. And it was something that, you always kind of like talked about. Like I even had this bias where I wanted a son first. And I would constantly say, like, I want a son. And I would be in the park sometimes by myself, and I would see the relationship that, the girl dads had. And I never understood it because I always wanted a son. And I think God was like, no, I know what you're gonna get. You're gonna get a girl. And the first time that I found out that I was gonna have a child, the instant reaction was shocked. As much as I wanted to have a child, I was almost speechless because I couldn't believe that now this was actually going to happen. And I think it got a lot more real because I'm heavily involved. I was heavily involved in the process of, watching the pregnancy develop and, listening to the heart and seeing the sonograms and being there from every step of the way, which is a complete opposite of what, is presented on Black Fathers. And that moment hit me when I found out. I was just almost speechless, and then instantly I went into this kind of like almost hustle mode. Like I started almost putting all this pressure on my back, saying, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to prepare for this, I got to make sure now. Certain people in my life started dropping. You know, I was already thinking that far ahead, where I have a child now, I can't really entertain this. And my child wasn't even born yet, but I was already forward thinking in that moment. And it really gave me anxiety for a while. And I think over time, as things started getting closer to the due date, things started getting a lot more, I would say, easier, because I almost embraced all of it. And then it was like that moment when we're in the room, and the delivery room, and then it's like within a blink of an eye, your child is here. And for me, it was like so much of that pressure was just dropped from me. And I just went into this moment of, I got this.
Yeah, thank you for that. Taylor?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of us that choose it, is that it's a rising to the occasion moment, simply, and as you grow as just an individual, there are several times where that's needed, and so when my daughter was born, I was 23 years old, so I was in the height of my happiness as a young adult, you know, and but it's simply for me. I mean, and I can't speak for everyone, but um, it was a rise to the occasion sort of thing. I became a single parent until my daughter was 6, and then I met my wife, and my wife has been in her life now. Again, she's 21 now, but um, just a joy, and I'm sure we'll have continuous conversations, as we continue on. But it truly is simply an idea of rising to the occasion, because this is quite the occasion, and it's a long-term occasion, and it's an expensive gig, and it's all of these things. But there's nothing like it. There is no comparison to that relationship. And with that said, it puts a lot of relationships in perspective, like Eric spoke to, where things just become less important and more important, and that's what I have to say about that.
Appreciate that. Courtney, chime in, please.
Yeah, yeah. Mine's kind of two sides, because my first child never made it into the world, and so I remember the feeling the day I found out that I was going to be a father was the same day that Eric Gardner was killed. And so I remember, my son's mother, right, but the same woman, um, put this whole gift box for me together, and I came into the house and she hands it to me, and it was like my joy was immediately over, like just covered by what Talib was talking about earlier with regards to his children being away from him. Like I felt that energy immediately at the same exact time, and it was just rough. I remember that experience being very rough, and to lose that child, it took a lot to come to a. It took a lot even just to feel it, because my body had completely shifted into a different space. And so when we were pregnant with our child who did make it into existence, my son Jameson, who's now 4, it was as if my body had purged some things, and so it was just complete joy, utter bliss, I would say, and not bliss just from that sense of happy, euphoric feeling, but the type of bliss that opens you up and makes you more vulnerable, and so you start to have feelings come in that you didn't even know were a part of you, and you got to learn how to process them. I think that's kind of what Eric was talking about with regards to the pre-planning and how your mind starts to shift into gear around like, all right, I got to step up. I got to take care of this. These relationships might not make it. These structures may not be relevant anymore. And being in that space for me was healthy in a sense. And I will say it carried me through the 9 months because, you know, I will never, ever, ever claim to have any shred of understanding of what a woman goes through during pregnancy, during that process. But watching it, having to interact with it, um, learning how to care for it, hold space for it, that's a whole probably another conversation we can have, we might get into today. But I will
Actually,
say,
I want to piggyback off of that.
yeah,
For a lot of us, that transition, some of us, for me, it was a culture shock.
mhm,
I didn't have the pre-planning. I didn't have the thoughts of I'm coming in dad. It was more of a culture shock. But I was there every step of the way. But watching her transform, can we speak to that? I know Courtney, you're going more into
yeah.
that. How was it in seeing what she was going through, on top of feeling what you're going through? What was that experience like for you?
I would probably say it was the most natural, and by natural I mean closest to nature experience of my life, where you really don't have any control on either side of the equation. What's going to happen is what's going to happen, um, and you just have to figure it out and flow with it. I will say, just from the perspective of fatherhood, it was my first experience with the necessity of making sure I dig my roots very deeply, right? Like knowing who I am, knowing what it is I stand for, and being able to show up in those ways fully, regardless of what may be happening. Because the 9 month experience is going to test you, simply for the fact that this woman is going through a full chemical shift, and her body is growing something that her body initially sees as a parasite. So her whole interaction with self is shifting, just trying to allow this child to grow within her. And of course, you know, when you get into the more uh, science science based aspects of that, just chemically, what's happening with emotions and hormones and all the things that you're used to now shifting towards making space for this life. And we're just outside, kind of not necessarily knowing a tenth of what's going on in there, but are responsible for a lot of things that we don't even know about. Um, and that can be a scary space at times, depending upon what type of pregnancy that woman has, whether it's a flowing fluid one, whether there's some pre postpartum stuff that sets in earlier, whether her body has a physical response that she wasn't ready for. So it's natural, right? It's it's that space of you walk outside on a Tuesday in Florida and it's sunny, it's 95 degrees, and then 3 minutes later it's pouring rain and it's a monsoon. Like it is a natural thing that for the most part none of us are really prepared for. I know for me personally, like as much as I learned, listened, and talked about relationships, I never really learned, listened, and talked a lot about pregnancy or that process, that window of time. And I will credit my son's my son's mother's father for giving me the best piece of advice. Where he said, "Listen, pregnancy is not 9 months. Pregnancy is 18 months. It's the 9 months that she's having, building that child, and then it's the 9 months after that that really shows you what life is going to be. So get 9 months out of your head. It's not done once that baby comes out. You have another 9 months to truly start to see, like, all right, what is shaping and what is life going to look like?" So it's a lot, man. But I would say in a nutshell, it is the first experience with like Mother Nature, like truly Mother Nature, and you got to figure out how to respond to it.
Eric, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, sure. So with me, I guess the one thing that I learned, and I think it's something that Courtney mentioned, where it's a constant learning um, pregnancy situation. You know, right while they're going through pregnancy, and then postpartum afterwards. I think the biggest thing for me was I'm I come from a family that kind of, even though, like, you know we may not necessarily have all the answers right away. We do a good job at controlling the situation or controlling what's in front of us. And I think this was one challenge where I didn't have no answers. No matter how much research you kind of did online or how many people you talked to, it always ended up with you just got to go through it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go through it, that's where all the answers are going to come to you. And I was like, well, that's not information. How all these people are having babies and no one can give me the right answers. And it was killing me. And each day I would learn something new. And I learned the most powerful thing that you can do for who you're having your child with is making sure that you are supporting them through every step of the way. Because there were moments where I would see that pain or I would kind of feel everything that they're going through by just watching her and just seeing her like, and I'm just standing there not being able to do anything other than show up, just holding a hand, or maybe even just like doing certain things that maybe I don't normally do because she can't do that right now. It was a huge shift because you're going through your emotions that you have, and then you also have to be that hero figure, that protection, that guardian for the person that you're with, and they can't see fear in you. And it'll even test what you allow people to communicate in front of them when they're going through pregnancy. Because like you said, Courtney, there's a chemical imbalance and there's so many emotions that are going through their head. Everything is changing. And when we were uh, going through our pregnancy, we were we were we were planning for a natural procedure the whole time, and it wasn't only until we got to the hospital and she had to get admitted early because she wasn't dilating, but her water kind of had broke, and we were in a position where our doctor was very, very I would say cautious and very informative to give us all the answers. Because as you know, there is a stereotype with minorities where they try to push more C-sections. And this was a situation where I literally had to make a decision in that moment. And I knew that there was going to be, I knew that this decision was going to be very impactful. And the doctor came in the room, and my mom was in there, my wife was in there, and he said, "We've been here for over 8 hours. Um, your daughter's not responding to what we're doing. And we're worried that if we do try to have this normal procedure, that she may go in cardiac arrest." So in that moment, I had to make a decision. And my mom, being very controlling, very like she knows everything, she's like, they're trying to push a C-section. I think, and in that moment, I had to kick her out because I knew that was making my wife nervous. And I had to be strong and I had to make that smart decision to get her out of the hospital. So me, and I think that's one thing that pregnancy teaches you is that nothing else matters other than the two people that are having the child. And when you go in that moment, it's a completely life-changing experience. And to what Courtney said, you know, when Zoe came out, it was like almost like my whole world changed, and it happened so fast. I think the best advice I would give to new fathers is no matter what decision is going to be made in that room, it's going to happen fast, and you're going to be holding your child in your arms. And I think that's what you have to kind of like look forward to. I do it all the time when I'm running. When I'm running a 5K, I'm like, this is going to be over. I'm gonna be right back in my car, and it's going to be over. And that's what gets me through, because running sometimes is not easy. And I feel like with pregnancy, the I'm still learning every single day. And I think the best thing in the world is the constant growth that you see your child mold a lot of the personalities and different things, and you start monitoring just pretty much everything. And I think Courtney's right. It's an 18-month it's an 18-month journey, and I'm still on it.
Thank you, Eric. I think it's necessary that these conversations are had. Very rarely do we hear the men's side of the pregnancy, because rightfully so, a lot of the emphasis is put on the woman because she's physically going through something. But the psychological and emotional change that we go through is a narrative that needs to be said. So I appreciate you guys for sharing that. Um, in that, what was the biggest change you felt you underwent in the pregnancy towards birth time? Let's start with Tyler.
Well, I don't have much to say here. I'm unconventional when it comes to being a single parent. So my daughter was 6, and the grace is that I spent 21 years ago. So y'all speak to y'all's very immediate and present experiences, because mine is distant at this point.
Makes sense. Courtney.
Um, ew, boy. I'll say this: pregnancy, the birth of my child, and marriage were my rites of passage to the doorway of manhood. Like it was what brought me to the door. It's not what got me to manhood, but it's what forced me to take that real um, deep analysis of self. Because hindsight, of course, there was a lot that I would have done differently. There was there were countless moments where if I were to replay them in my mind, even when Eric was speaking, like that's starting to make me tear up a little bit, because I remember similar experiences. Like my son's mother did 36 hours of unmedicated labor before we had to go to get a C-section. She had to go to get a C-section because she wouldn't dilate. And so that space of helplessness, because there's nothing you can do there, right? Like Eric, you were fortunate to have that memory of being able to support her by having the right people in the space. For me, it was like everybody that was right was supposed to be there. We had the midwifery, we did the natural birth, we had a birthing team, and 2 of those women had also had a natural birth. So it was like I got every soldier I need in this room, including my own will and desire to bring this child into the world successfully. And we're still hitting a pivot, and I mean a hard pivot to that same point of like my son's heart rate dropped 3 times. And the midwife was like, look, if it happens again and it stops, like we can't resuscitate from inside the womb. So we need to go now. And it's to Eric's point, it's like quick things start happening when you want to take the time to process. And if you don't have some sort of foundational grounding, right? Like some deep roots, everything starts to pull up around you real quick. And I think that's what I experienced most, or that's what my memory brings me back to most. It's all of the different experiences where it was like, damn, I really didn't have deep roots yet. And trying to quickly start digging deeper roots, which is not something you can actually do. Like it naturally just takes time. But yeah, it went from that experience to once I got to that door of manhood and choosing to open it myself, it all just became not easier, but more acceptable. And so now I look back at it with the mindset of I just be a silver surfer, like to reference one of my favorite comic books, man. The waves of this thing are going to crash. Some are going to flow. You could have a treacherous first trimester and then have the smoothest, most intimate, amazing second trimester. And then third trimester comes and it's like, nah, that was a joke. and you got something totally different. So the whole time you're literally going to experience your partner, this child being created, and yourself differently. And it really does make a difference, how grounded you are in your sense of self. Because as much as she's changing, like to your point, Clarence, the space of what we go through and how we change does not really get talked about. Which then goes to say, like, there's not a lot of places you can go to discover what you're supposed to do or how you should process your feelings. Um, and to Eric's point, like, even when you do have a space, can't nobody really prepare you for this. So again, it's just that space of that understanding of the more you can work on yourself before you choose to make yourself into a parent, the better. That's just my take on it.
Thank you for that. Anything you want to add, Eric?
Mine's very quick. Just I've been searching in life. You know, you find the, let's say, the right career, and you find um, the right girl, and then you think everything that you got the right friends, you go get clothes, you go buy all the things that you love, and then you have a child and you realize that's what life is all about. And I feel like that's one thing that changed my life. I realized there's no greater joy than that. And I feel like if I was to fail everything else but be a great father, I feel like I won in life. So I would just say that changed me.
When my daughter was born, that speaking to that 9 months after, I suffered from postnatal depression. I felt we always talk about the women and how they feel the depression. I had that, and it was real hard to connect with my daughter afterwards. So I want to take this time to talk about how did you start that initial connection with your children once they were born?
I'll jump in. For me, I would say I went into an instant. Um, I would say I was fortunate enough to be able to work from home. But I think after Zoe got around 2, 3 months old, then I became like this workaholic, and I almost separated myself from the house because of fear of failing my newborn. So I would spend a lot of time at work just trying to make sure things were taken care of. And that involved me going to a lot of events, me, traveling a lot. And I kept always saying to myself, like, oh, she's only 3 months, like it's okay. Or she's only like this age. And I spent a lot of time at home, but I also spent a lot of time outside of the house. And I feel like one thing that was happening was when I didn't really know what to do with uh, my daughter, because at the time my mom was there, she was being a nanny for us. It was almost like I excluded myself out of the equation because my mom was there during the day. And then at night, it was like my wife was handling certain duties until I was forced into a situation where I had to watch her by myself. And then I was like, oh, that's how you put on a pamper. Oh, that's how you know, feed her the bottle. And oh, that's how you deal with her if she's crying, or all these different things. And I feel like I learned it very quickly, in terms of like, it just took me to actually own up and embrace the whole situation. Because during pregnancy, even though I was very supportive, I wasn't the one who was online every single day, like looking up, like, okay, what's the best bottles? What's the best Pampers? What's the safe toys? When do you give your child the first bath? So all of these things were like almost like foreign to me. So I kind of had to just have that moment where I had to get thrown into kind of like everything. And that's when I kind of like got it. And then once I got it, I was 100% committed. But then as I was committed, I was almost having that postpartum depression of man, did I not do enough in the beginning? And it kept making me like just be. I was overcompensating how much time I was spending with my daughter because it was almost that guilt was still following me. Like, man, I'm not doing enough, and it was like I realized that no matter how much I do, I can never do as much as the mom, and I had to accept that, and that was hard at first, and I feel like it still sometimes pops up occasionally where I ask myself, am I doing enough, or am I okay? Because you realize when when you laugh and you smile, your child does that. When you're angry and your emotions are down, you realize your child is looking at you and embracing that emotion. So for so long I had to kind of like watch the way I was, because I do believe in, positive energy and making sure that you give good vibes around, the people that you love. And I wanted to make sure that, because she's a sponge and she's just looking at me just for answers and to be there, I wanted to make sure that that emotional effect of me having postpartum didn't affect kind of like the child. And I think one of the most disheartening things is that I feel like most people don't take men postpartum seriously. And when you try to talk about it, there's no one really that you could really talk to unless a man out there is willing to be vocal about it. That's why I'm kind of happy that this took place, because I feel like most men bottle it up because your boys or whoever may not necessarily share that side. And most of the time it's just all about, like, I remember the first time, you know there was a situation where my wife was having something, and I was just like, man, everyone is praising her for having this child, but what about me? I'm also the dad. And it's like that funny story about like Father's Day, like everyone forgets, but it was like one of those moments where I actually felt like, man, like, why does no one understand that guys, we go through not necessarily the same thing. I think we go through something very uniquely different. And sometimes I think it will be nice to have that support.
I think far too often there's a comparison, and people think that it needs to be compared. It's one experience uniquely shared. So we're going to experience it different, but our experience is valuable as well. I felt completely unsupported and invisible during the pregnancy, despite doing everything. I didn't miss any doctor's appointments. And going to Eric's point, like, who asks us how's dad when you're going through that? So yeah, this is why things like this is necessary. Courtney, your thoughts?
Yes, and I think that we are broaching on um, a topic that has a lot of breadth and depth, right? So, Clarence, I love your point around an individual shared experience, because it really is that. Um, but moving further into that space that Eric was talking about, that's what I was talking. That's what I was referring to when I said being deeply rooted, right? Because the deeper your roots, the harder it is for that tree to sway back and forth. And so, if you look at emotions as the wind that moves us back and forth, the deeper your roots are, the more difficult it is for that wind to move you deeply. Um, Give me 1 second, baby boy. Come here. Yes, you can. Um, and so for me, where that place showed up was all in that time frame. And excuse me, because yep, this thing don't never stop. Baby, look, Dad's on the call. You want to join in, or can I finish? Finish. All right, go ahead. I hit you in a second. Kid out your nose. um, well, part of me feels exactly what you all are feeling, or what you all felt in that space. But then another part of me recognizes that in my personal experience, I don't know In my personal experience, I know that I took fatherhood more seriously than marriage. And so I did the diapers. I never missed an appointment. We had a schedule where I owned
Did
every
you just say
boy.
diapers?
Did you hear me say already? So what you should do? Thank you, my son. We had a schedule where I covered everything up until 4 a.m. She covered everything after 4 a.m. And so literally, if I was not on travel, which I tried not to be for that time period where, we're still learning how to sleep train and things like that, like I was owning it. I was where I needed to be. You got to give me a second time. Go sit down.
Okay, I'll just throw you some.
Thank you. But then there was the whole process of supporting her in learning, like, okay, so I'm good at this fathering thing. I got these bottles down. I could change a diaper. I could swaddle. We got mechanisms for everything. Even down to how we figured out how to make my son stop crying was he loved the sound of running water. And it was just random. Like it was that night where he wouldn't stop. And I'm holding him and it's like, rah. And I turned the water on and he stopped. And it was like, oh, cheat code. But all of that again was focused on the kid, was focused on the child. Very little of the experience for me was a deep learning about her. And I think that's for me where the disconnect from being able to have the shared experience came in for me, was because if I don't make her aware that I am there, then she can't necessarily be responsible for holding space for me. And I know that's different for others, but that's my personal story. So that's the best way I could say it. And there's a lot that goes into that side of it too, but I'll stop there because it's like, we all know that time period where it feels like romance, and somebody just said it, romance and love is key, but we feel like romance has completely gone out of the window, or at least romance in terms of how we've pictured it. And now there's this constant, like, sixth toe or third wheel that you are tethered to in love, but like also it's taking away from something that you thought was meant for you, right? In terms of your gift has to be shared, and the same from her perspective. So in hindsight, for me, it's just about a lot of grace, and that's one thing that my son's mother and I are good at now. We give each other a lot of grace. Like, we don't assume what something was written means this or this action meant that. No assumptions whatsoever, but tons and tons of grace.
I thoroughly appreciate that because, as someone who's probably newer to being a father, I radiate with that, trying to make that connection with the romance, because that's key. But again, I suffered from depression for almost a year. My daughter's going to be 2, so I'm just now getting out of it, and then trying to make that same connection. Talib, I wanted to get you in the conversation because you have a unique experience of being a single father. Can you speak to how you felt in terms of being both mom and dad in those kind of developmental years?
Sure. I mean, because that's real, as that the statement of being both mom and dad is as real as it's not, right? It's like dads are just as capable, and it's simply a human interacting with another human. It's just littler and does shit that you don't know why it's happening, you know. Um, and so it's just a great deal of adjusting and adapting, you know, a great deal of it. And so, you know, having to navigate all of these things, essentially alone. I mean, I had my support system. My mother was there. I have a twin sister, who was there, and I had a niece who was 6 at the time. So and so my sister having my niece early in our lives when she was 17 years old, um, and being in the height of her happy, you know, my mother and I really supported my niece a lot. So I'd had some understanding of what it looks like to step up and protect, you know, and be mindful of this other little person. Now there was times where I'm like, "What are you crying for?" And it's 1:30, and I'm like, "Oh, she ain't ate yet." Granted, I'm 17, so I don't really know what's happening, but I'm learning as I go, you know. So by the time mine came, I knew that they needed to eat. She needed to eat before 1 o'clock. And so so it's definitely a lot of you know, just being with it. It's tough times. It's hard as hell, because a lot of people have the ideas of children based off of an experience that is not yours specifically or personally. And so watching a niece is a whole lot different than taking care of your own child. You know, seeing other folks be in, you know, in relationship with their children is completely different from you being in a relationship with your children. And there's levels to this. You know, what you're dealing with at 17 months is not what you're dealing with at 4, and what y'all are dealing with. There's people see babies and they're cute and they don't talk, and that's fine. And then you want them to talk, and then you want them to shut the hell up, and then and then they just continue to evolve. And one of the things that was so, I was just enamored. I've always been. I'm doing a live with my daughter tomorrow, and I've just always been completely over the hills with this child. You know, her daycare provider, when she was 2, she's like, I've never seen 2 people happier to see each other at the end of a day. You know, like y'all both just smiling and can't get to each other quick enough. And so, and I think that has a lot to do with, you know, upbringing, but you know, that's another story for another time. But I decided to be intentional. You know, there was a lot of things left on the table when it came to me. There was a lot of ways in which the grace is given to my parents now, because they were, my mother was 19 and with twins. I was 23 and there was a one child coming in the world. And I was like, if there's twins, I'm jumping a bridge. So it's like, I understood, you know, that there is this, it's a lot to it. And it's not, it doesn't end, and they shape and they change and they morph into things. And like in this first year, I mean, it's like the mutant year. How do you go from not doing nothing to walking and talking by the end of the year? That's the craziest, it's the craziest thing in the world. They like little freaking mutants. But and then it just continues to grow. But it's for me, it was always, I was just excited, man. I was just excited to have this child who looked at me, you know, and to become a superhero in somebody's eyes when you've never been superhero before in anybody else's eyes, it changes things as well, you know. So for me, it's adjusting and adapting every step of the way. And like I said, it's also evolving with them. We think that, you know, when she was 4, I couldn't imagine her living off on her own. I would say, oh God, like I can never imagine that. Well, we evolved to the point where, okay, I see you, you know, I see you when I see you. And we talk every day and we FaceTime every day. And there's this, because we connect, and always allowing space for her to express, and always be in the space for listening, not be in the space for criticism first. You know, we see parents, child comes out, so you see how you send them to school and how they come back, and the first thing a parent might say is, "Look at you! Like what happened here?" You know, when actually the first step gets to be, "I'm so happy to see you." You know, get in the car, let's buckle up. And then you can say, what happened? Like, what happened today? But if that's the first thing that they always see, we're shaping our children into understanding who they are from the way in which we respond, and who we are and how we be. And so that's very important. And I probably went somewhere else with the question at this point, but yeah, it's just, yeah, it's just an opportunity. And like I said, I'm so in love. It's just, you know, I'm the wrong person to talk to sometimes when it comes to, I had to step the fuck up. Like I didn't have no other choice. You know, when we were having the mudslides come out them Pampers, it's like, okay, this is life now. This is what it is, you know. This is what it is. Like, how did this happen? What's going on? But you know, this to my initial point, rising to the occasion. And that's what we get to do. We don't know what to do. We can't. And every child is its own child. Whether you have 1 or 4, you know, each child deserves their own space to be who they are and to grow as they're going to grow. And so that's just the opportunity here, you know, is in learning them while they learn you.
Thank you for that. And I think just to piggyback off of that, a great question that was presented from our audience is how do we create better legislation for the rights of single fathers? I would like to just elevate that a little bit more to fathers in general because I know when I took 3 months off when my daughter was born. I only was allotted 5 days.
Mm.
Paternity doesn't exist. But I told them I need to be there for my child. My child has to bond with me. My child needs to see me, needs to hear me, needs to smell me. Um, but our legislation go back to work, and this is why a lot of the narrative is dads are just the financial arm. So going directly to the question before elevating it to how do you feel about the role society, the weight society puts on us? Talib, can you speak to how do we create better legislation for the rights of single fathers?
Well, again, there's so many different ways in which people may become a single father or what have you. I didn't have to go through anything. When it came to my child, I simply had my child, and that was the end of it. Um, and so I say this. I will say this to this that point though is that I think I think that the justice system is what it is, and typically and socially, the mother is what people see as the person, the person who the baby needs the most, and it's true. I mean, it really is true. But there's also the very real necessity for fathers as well, and so. Um, I think when we get caught up, and again, this is not my situation, so I can't really speak to it, and I won't speak to it in a space of absolutely knowing because I did not have to go through any BS like at all. Um, but fathers who do have to go through that, I think there's an opportunity to be committed to what is best for the child and not in a commitment to the ego or the pride or what have you like that, because I say that to say that there is a process to this, and what we get to do as fathers is continue to show up and not let a system that wants us to give up the fight allow us to give up the fight, not allow for low vibrational humans to who may be unexamined, uninvolved, unhealed, to box us out of a space where we absolutely belong and are needed. And so that takes a different level of understanding and awareness and commitment and dedication to the process. It's not always going to be easy. It can get downright ugly. Um, but my advice when I talk to fathers who are in these predicaments is that the easiest thing is to give up. The easiest thing is to say, all right. And we've seen that happen. How many of our fathers of our generation said, well, she didn't let me. She wouldn't let me. She didn't, every time I tried, she did it. And I'm like, okay, I still don't get it. I'm not hearing it yet. Like what happened? Like what's the problem? So and I get that there's dynamics, but all I'm saying is that, and I'm not helping with this question, but what I am saying is don't give up the fight. Stay in it. Stay in it. Go to every court. Go to everything that you need to do in order to show up, and you cannot be denied because they will deny you in every angle. It's just the way it's set up. But don't let it take you out. Don't let it take you out the game, and stay focused. Keep your eye on the prize, because the prize is that child that gets to have you in the long run. And your report card doesn't come from mom or the judge. The report card comes from your child at the end of the day, where they're saying, Dad tried. Dad was there. Dad didn't get to do it often, but when he did, it was impactful and it was meaningful, and it was whatever it is. But we first get to show up and be in a space where there any bullet they can throw at you, they're going to throw at you and shoot at you. So the goal is to not give them the ammo in order to do it.
I'll jump in on that one because I'm probably the only one of the three of us who has gone through the legal system with regards to all of this. And so I'll say it's twofold. So first and foremost, for men, it is imperative that before you look at what is wrong with the legal system, you learn it to understand where it actually benefits you. Legality, when it comes to children, custody, all of this stuff, is based on precedence most of the time. Yes, the law based on precedence favors women, but that is largely because of what Talib was touching on. And if you have 3 or 4 generations that have subsequently said, oh, she wouldn't let me, or took their hands off of the fight, then legally the precedence has been set and starts to skew that way. That's how our justice system works in general. It is all based on precedence. If you are cognizant enough to when your child is born, regardless of the situation, to immediately ensure that the precedence of that child's life involves you directly in a time frame that is equitable, meaning as close to 50-50 or more as you can get it, you now have precedence when you go into a legal situation. If you are seeing your child once or twice a month, and then you all of a sudden want to have 50-50 custody, you don't have a track record of precedence. And so it is not necessarily the judge or the legal system's job to award you something that they can't determine was necessary prior to you having this change. And it goes the same way on the woman's side as well. And that's why it tends to skew to a mother having greater precedence. Precedence is because they're there. Presence matters a lot in this case. And so for me, my situation specifically, my son's mother and I had very differing views on what we wanted with regards to the custody environment. Both of us had had a sound reason for our viewpoints. So it was an interesting environment where she wasn't necessarily trying to hold me from seeing my child. I wasn't necessarily ego driven towards like, nah, I want to have my child around for this specific reason or that specific reason. It was just literally, 1 second, baby. It was 2 different people who had 2 different opinions and were both valid in having their own opinions. But now you're talking about a situation where that's not how this works. At least when you take it to the legal system. Now, if you're able to communicate 2 humans or 1 human to 1 human, there's much more space to create something that is equitable based on what you 2 both want and desire, right? And I think now I'm starting to hear more of that, right? I'm starting to hear more about parents who are figuring this thing out on their own as opposed to going to the legal system, because the legal system is going to be based on rules and precedents. And that's not necessarily going to make things equitable. And so in my situation, it was a matter of precedents that allows certain things to happen in a certain way. Whether that is right or wrong is determinable by somebody's perception, right? And what they believe personally. But we have 50-50 shared custody of our child legally and physically. And it is a space now where we are learning how to co-parent, and we're actually really good at co-parenting as a result of what happened in that time period where precedents mattered, and I stood my ground on what precedents had already been set, and so what was going to move forward in the future. And so that's another piece of it as well, right? Is the protection of the child and who is most well equipped to protect this child as they grow and develop. Baby boy.
What's so funny?
Sorry, he's having a great time. It's daddy weekend, so like he does not care about any of this stuff. And so that time period of like the courts being the lead in terms of determining who was most fit to protect the child was the exact same time frame where we were less involved in fighting for our rights to be around our child. So you have precedents being set where now the court is not necessarily enforcing the decision, but they're assessing and then making one, and then have to subsequently go further down the line of how just legality works. And so this is different based on state by state, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. There are some jurisdictions that have really, really stupid and archaic laws of um, separation and divorce and shared custody that just don't make any sense in today's society. But that's why I say it is imperative, especially for men, that we understand, we research, we educate ourselves on the legal system in the area, in the vicinity in which we have had a child, right? My son was born in Virginia, but we were married in Washington, D.C. And so the D.C. court is what we had to deal with. Didn't matter where he was born. If we lived in a certain spot, wherever we decided to live, and that child was currently existing, and where we got married, set precedents. All of these things matter. And to be honest with you, I hate the fact, thank you, man, that these have to be things that we even have to think about. Like, you should not have to enter marriage or parenthood with any sort of realm of thought to like what is legally going to be defensible for you if you have to fight for your rights. But that's the world we live in. And so because of that, we can't necessarily ask for it to change. We have to demand for it to change, which is back to Talib's point of like, you just got to show up most of the time. I mean, literally showing up in the courtroom for me, because one, if you've ever been to a custody hearing, you sit in the room and you listen to other custody hearings happen while yours is coming up on the docket. So you get to get some knowledge if you're paying attention to what's going on around you. You see who's manipulating, you see who's angling, you see who's doing all these different things. And so for me, I paid attention to all of it. Like, I paid attention to what my lawyer said. I paid attention to what I felt. I paid attention to what the dialogues were when we were going through custody counseling. And then when we got into the courtroom and I got to assess that judge in the four or five other cases before ours got up on the docket, I assessed how that judge operated. Was the judge leaning more towards the woman or to the man? Was he being more down the middle and allowing people to make their own decisions as opposed to putting him in the sense of authority of who's right or wrong here? Again, we're talking about legalities. We ain't talking about what's right. And as many of us, especially as Black men, know, your legal rights have very few things to do with your human rights. And this situation is no different. I'll stop there because I'm getting real wordy with it. But yes, this is not about your human rights. This is about your legal rights. And you need to understand them if you want to embark on that journey.
I appreciate that. I think that was a necessary dialogue to have because of so many of us find ourselves in that realm, and it's necessary for us to understand how we can better be stronger in those situations. So thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Talib, for that. But today is also about celebrating fathers, celebrating the journey that we've had, and putting the spotlight on us as dads. What has been the most challenging aspects of being a father thus far for you? Let's go with Eric first.
I think for me, one of the most challenging things is realizing how fast, like what Talib was saying, like they're like mutants, like how fast they develop. I mean, there's been times when I would leave the house and come back home and it look like my daughter's like 2 inches taller, you know?
Yeah.
And I'll be scratching my head like, man, like what did I miss? What was a major challenge for me, COVID-19 made it like not a challenge anymore. And I would say when you go to work and you have the ability to, you know, have someone in the house to, you know, mind your child, and you're able to go and, you know, get out of the house and go to work or whatever. By the time you get home, you realize you missed so much. And I think that's why when COVID-19 happened, for me, I looked at this situation as a positive, and I said, I get to bond with my daughter. So every single day, we learned different things. We were bonding in a way that was just like I would have never been able to do this if COVID-19 didn't happen, and it allowed this huge kind of like just pile up of energy that went between the both of us. And you know, we would play the piano together, we watch TV together. She'll watch me cook. And then she started even taking on my authority with the dogs, and I would tell the dogs to sit. And then all of a sudden, I hear this little voice saying, "Sit, sit," and I'm like, "What is going on?" Like, and none of this stuff would have happened if I would have never embraced COVID-19 the way I did. And I feel like the biggest challenge, and one of the biggest challenges for me, was always feeling like I'm missing out. I felt FOMO with my own child. I would be out sometimes when you got to focus on self sometimes, because it's very important in the relationship, even when you have a child, or you're married, or you have a spouse or whatever, where there may be times where the guys may ask you to come out, or you got a work event or something like that, and then you leave feeling guilty. And I feel like that's a huge challenge that parents go through as well, where you're out and you're just daydreaming about your child, and you're not really in the moment and enjoying yourself, because you're wondering, like, oh my gosh, I hope everything's all right. I remember in our old house, we went to our neighbor's house to have dinner, and it was this full on dinner. We was drinking and everything. And I really couldn't get comfortable because my father was watching my daughter. And when we left, my father was getting into somewhat of a like a little discussion with her, like, "You're gonna be good," and she was like not having it. She was just not. She wasn't feeling him that night. And when we came back downstairs and we got back home, it looked like my father was defeated. It looked like he was just like super defeated. And everything that was going in my head was, oh my gosh, I hope she wasn't crying the whole time. I hope, she wasn't like, did she eat, and all of these things. So I feel like I never want to miss any moments. And I feel like I'm learning how to somewhat enjoy me time, and also put in enough time where I feel like I'm still getting enough of her. So for me, that was one of the things that I could say going through parenthood was just, missing out on all the great moments that a lot of fathers, that we strive for that. And I think just to tap back into what we was the question previously before, I think there's not enough of this promoted and enough of this. So like Courtney and Talib said, we got to keep pressing and keep showing up, so that way the narrative does change, because they're going to start seeing more of us doing all of these things, being more present. And when they start seeing that, and it's not the typical, like, the dad complaining about child support or complaining about this or whatever, like, if we constantly show up, eventually the narrative has to change. And I think it's only now where you're starting to see that socially being pushed. And I'm just thankful that I figured out the challenge that I've been going through, and I'm still learning as I go along, because I'm still a new father.
Yeah. And as again, farther removed from the baby portion of this all, and the young early development, it is space for us to give ourselves grace inside of this, because it's a learning and it's a discovery. And if you are open to it, it's a great one, because you're going to learn so much through your child. They're going to show you so much. They're going to tell you, if you allow space for this, they're going to tell you where you're rearing off. They ask you questions, they'll speak up. And it's up to us to feedback is real. And I believe that we can receive feedback from all beings, and that whether they're small or big. And so I think there's simply opportunity here to celebrate ourselves for being present, being in a part of their lives in a way that doesn't say we deserve a cookie. This is absolutely what we are supposed to do, and if we've brought a life into this world. But there's so much to be celebrated, especially when your child is in a space to celebrate you, because it's one thing to say I'm a good parent. It's a whole nother thing for them to say you're a good parent. Like that if they don't align, and you got some work to do, right? And so that's the opportunity here. Again, is if my daughter and my stepson say you did okay, you did this right, and also being willing to ask. I've asked my daughter, is there anything I did that screwed this all the way up, and I need to atone for it? And we need to discuss it, and we need to talk about it. And even though I'm sure there was at that point in our life, she said, no, no, you're fine right now. You're good. We can talk about some things as they develop, but you're good right now. And so it's really about being in each moment and being able to respect this individual that happens to be in a little body, because that's all they are. And I know we're wrapping up, but I love the fact that you guys are all here and in this commitment to being the best parents that you can be, because it's possible. And even if we have not the example, we know what it could look like and what it gets to look like, and being a commitment to that is important.
Yeah, I don't even remember the question anymore. I'm just listening.
Celebrating us as fathers, man, or fatherhood in general.
So just real quick, Courtney, and then for everybody, as we wrap this up, what do you want everyone to know about Black Fatherhood? From your perspective, what is something that you want to highlight that we all need to know and that we can take away to realize that, hey, we're here, we're trying, we're not trying to get the award for what we're supposed to do. We're just doing what we have to do.
All right. Well, I'll jump in on that one. Because this, and very personally for fathers, Black fathers who have Black sons. And it's something that my son's mother said well before my son was even born, but it was true for things she saw in her family. Too often, we love our sons and we raise our daughters, right? We put these parameters and these strict boundaries around our daughters to ensure that they're protected and cared for. And we're much looser with how our sons are brought up, and that maturates over time, right? That seed that you plant grows into something. And so I would say that it is imperative that we raise our sons just as much as we raise our daughters. And Talib, you could probably speak a whole world to that part of it, but especially as Black men, there are so many necessities with regard, and we're seeing these things kind of show up more in our face, not right in our society today. There are so many necessities that go with being a Black man that are not our responsibility, that were not put here by us, that it is very easy to skirt and overlook the ones that are our responsibilities, and that we do need to be impeccably accountable for. And so before that even becomes an issue, before we even have to talk about what is the challenges that we face as Black men dealing with Black women or interacting with Black women, you start to have that not be a factor if you are raising your son in a certain light and in a certain manner. For me, I was raised with a lot of love, a lot of love. And I've hid behind that for a long time because what was also true was I was raised where I didn't really get my neck pulled too often. People wasn't snatching me by my neck saying like, yo, you shouldn't be doing that. Or really giving me some act right when I needed it most. And so what was planted in that seed grew into a lot of the things that I learned and the things that I became. And it wasn't until, again, like fatherhood and marriage taught me like, nah, if you don't have somebody, especially as a man, pointing you towards the things you know you need to be focused on and moving you away from all the stuff that society kind of makes you focus on, you're not going to catch where you're messing up and where you need to check yourself and where you need to do deeper learning, where you need to listen, where you need to apologize, where you need to incorporate compassion as opposed to control. And for me, because that's my story specifically, that's what I would touch on. So if you are a Black man with a son, make sure that you are raising your son and not just loving your son.
Eric?
Um, mine would be like fairly quick. It would mostly touch on like the inspiring factor. I feel like the reason why, um, speaking on just Black communities, Black families, um, a lot of our history has been erased in terms of what we come from and how great we were. So sometimes not knowing that information, it almost it continues to oppress us. So I would say, as a Black father, we need to do more research on how we were as family men back in the day, and how we did support our homes, and we were there for our children, whether we were married or not. And I feel like the media has done a misrepresentation of that for so long. We fell into the trap of believing it. And I feel like over time, we will get back to spreading more of this information, which kind of inspires more dads out there to actually fight to be in their kids' lives. Because I think it's very easy to walk away from a very toxic situation and also leave the child behind if you are constantly seeing broken families on TVs. And a broken family doesn't necessarily mean like the husband and the wife are no longer together anymore. Broken family, as in, are you in that child's life? Are you present? Are you 100% active? Is the mother active in that child's life? And I feel like for so long, we've just had this bad narrative on Black communities, and we need to stop going to those sources to get that information. And we need to talk to people around us. Like, this is a call with four of us, and all four of us are in our child's lives. And there's not going to be a movie written about that. You know what I mean? It's going to be that mom who's by herself, or how the storyline usually is. And I feel like Black fathers, if you want to be empowered, um, know that there's so many people out there. I have so many friends, even a few in here, who are constantly in their child's life. I mean, you would think that the moms don't exist, but that's just the way they showcase their love to their kids. And that needs to be embraced more. That needs to be showcased more. And if a Black father is ever out there feeling down, feeling like they're not, feel like they're alone, I feel like they need to go to that type of source. Ask a friend, ask someone who is in a men's group, like, hey, is there any like dads that can share like their experiences? We need more of this, so that way we continue to motivate and be there for our kids. And I feel like with that type of empowerment, nothing can stop us.
Word, word.
Talib?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of our duties and responsibilities, of course, disrupting pathologies, um, making sure that whatever it was that has occurred in our own lives, that we don't project it onto our children, and we also take the time to examine and heal up those things that will cause us to be passive in their life, take a back seat in their life, or not instill that worthiness. If I think I'm unworthy, how am I going to appeal to my child's worthiness? And so I think there's a major key in especially Black children's lives, and us being Black children at one point in our time in our life, that but the moment you open your eyes in the hospital, there's whiteness. Yeah, K to 12, you get taught a whole bunch of things that it's our responsibility to debrief them when they come home. But I just want to say that how important it is for us as parents, to do our self work, so that we can be emotionally available. We don't emotionally negate, because I went through it and I lived, you'll live too. Well, and I'm okay, but actually you're not okay, like by no stretch of the imagination. Are you okay? I actually want to be okay for mine. And so I think we are not an exception to the rule. And the only narrative that I'm concerned about changing is the narrative of my children, of our children, of Black children who get to walk around this earth, knowing that even if their father is no longer alive, because that's a thing too, that there's someone cared about them, that they have love in this world and they have somebody that has their back. I always told my daughter all through her growing up, if you're wrong, we're going to talk about it and there's going to be consequences to it. If you're right, me and you going to go down there together and we're going to handle this thing. And so having somebody that has your back, loves you, supports you, and sees the value in you because you see the value in yourself is everything. And this conversation can go on forever, but thank you.
I thoroughly appreciate you, gentlemen. I appreciate the words, your insights, your presence. It's necessary. As a new father, I was very lost, felt very unsupported, felt very unsure, and I didn't have this. I didn't have any men I can go to who could give me a blueprint. So I'm appreciative of this conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure that our audience learned a lot. But on behalf of Mastermind Connect, I thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on this journey today as we take the narrative back and additionally kind of highlight who we are as dads. Because that's an important role. It's a milestone in our lives that transforms us. And who we become will help our kids become that much better. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers, all the father figures, and all the role models. Thank you all, and have a great week.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Happy Father's Day, everybody.
All right. You too.